in the name of personal injury law.
The federal law known as Title IX has helped bring equality and reduce discrimination in public schools and universities. The law has also provided important rights to people who have been victims of sexual assault in public schools and university settings. Now, this summer marks the 50th anniversary of the passage of Title IX. However, rather than just celebrating the law, we have Steve Sinas from the Sinas law firm with his colleague John Homa to discuss a concerning United States Supreme Court decision impacting Title IX rights of sexual assault survivors. Steve and John, it's good to have you here.
Thanks for having us.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Steve, what does Title IX provide? What kind of rights to people who have been sexually assaulted in the public school and university setting?
Well, as you already touched on, I want to acknowledge that Title IX has done a whole lot of good for this country, especially to bring equality and reduce discrimination in public schools and universities. It's especially helped females in the athletics, and so it's done a whole lot of good. It's also provided important rights to people who are sexually assaulted in a public school or university setting where they can show that the school or university failed to take the steps necessary to protect them from that type of an assault. And in those situations, Title IX has provided them the right to pursue a civil claim where they can recover what are known as economic damages to cover their medical expenses, and also to recover their non-economic damages, which is compensation for their pain, suffering, and mental anguish that arises from the sexual assault. Now, I want to say that there are other ways people who are victims of sexual assault in the school setting can pursue civil justice, but Title IX has been an important one and has definitely recognized those two types of damages, economic and non-economic damages, as being recoverable. But John's going to explain to us how the Supreme Court may draw into question whether those damages still are recoverable.
Okay, John, so what case was it at the United States Supreme Court, and what was that decision all about?
Sure. Well, the case is titled Jane Cummings versus Premier Rehab Keller. And this case, I'll just make the point, involved two federal anti-discrimination statutes, the Rehabilitation Act and the Affordable Care Act. It didn't address the Title IX law specifically, even though it was discussed at length in the opinion. But it's important to recognize that the two statutes that were addressed in the Cummings case are enacted by Congress under the spending clause to prevent discrimination in certain institutions, very similar to what Title IX does in the educational setting. And in Cummings, it involved an individual lady, Jane Cummings, who was deaf and requested a sign language interpreter for her rehab therapy, and that was denied. And so she ultimately ended up bringing a claim under the Rehabilitation Act and the Affordable Care Act to seek redress for the discrimination she experienced in this Medicaid state environment. The court ultimately held that in a case involving these discrimination statutes, that her ability to receive compensation was limited, specifically that she could not receive compensation for any emotional harms or any emotional losses that she suffered as a result of the discrimination.
So how did the court reach that holding, and how does it impact Title IX cases?
Well, the court reached the holding by analyzing the statutes that were at issue, and they recognized that these anti-discrimination statutes were set up under the spending clause, and they applied to federal funding recipients and essentially form an implied contract between the funding recipient and the government. And in order to receive the funds, the funding recipient agrees not to have discriminatory practices within their environment. And so the way the court reached its holding is it recognized that traditionally, under a breach of contract theory, in our common law, emotional damages are not recoverable. And so the court applied that same analysis to these cases and says because they involve a breach of an implied contract between the funding recipient and the government, that the only damages that someone can really recover for a breach in one of these types of environments is limited to economic damages only, and they cannot receive compensation for non-economic damages or emotional suffering, because it just simply wasn't recognized as a form of damages that are recoverable under contracts under our common law.
And that's how it ties into the Title IX issue?
Yeah, well, the Title IX, it's the same type of statute. So
Okay.
the concern at this point is that this decision is now going to be interpreted to apply in the same way in Title IX, so that people bringing claim under Title IX for compensation for sexual assault are going to be faced with an argument that the non-economic damages they're pursuing may not be recoverable.
Okay, thank you. Now I understand. So if Title IX may not provide these people with compensation for their pain and suffering and their emotional harm damages, are there other claims that these sexual assault survivors can bring to recover those types of damages?
Yeah, and the first thing to understand is that if you're a victim of sexual assault, you have rights to have the person criminally prosecuted, and the state brings those charges. But if you want to bring your own civil claims for compensation for what we've been referring to as economic damages or your non-economic damages, you may have various types of claims that you could bring depending on the situation. So every sexual assault claim is unique and needs to be analyzed based on its facts. And in the public school setting, that's definitely the case. And that's where Title IX applies, that the public school or university setting. And even if this decision were to be interpreted in the way that people fear it may be, these people can still pursue other claims under federal laws known as Section 1983 for a violation of their equal protection rights, their deprivation of their fundamental rights for their bodily integrity. And there's also state law claims that they can bring. So it can get pretty complicated in these types of cases, but it's not that these people don't have any ability to recover non-economic damages. It's just that unfortunately our United States Supreme Court has made it more difficult for them to make those claims.
So to help me understand, if a sexual assault survivor is bringing a Title IX claim, they're suing the university or their school, are they also in the same case suing, like, for example, the assailant or employees of the school, like maybe who allowed it to happen? Or is it just against the university itself?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you, there's various state claims and federal claims that are brought in these types of cases, and it's quite typical that several school officials and other entities would be named in connection. The Title IX claim is specifically geared toward the federal institute or the institution that receives the federal funds, so the school itself. And it's particularly important because quite often public schools and universities have some level of governmental immunity and function of their jobs. And Title IX was really the framework that we've used over the past decades to help hold schools liable for their own acts of harm in connection with sexual assaults. But certainly there are very other entities and individuals that could be named alongside the institution itself.
So if we're holding the institution responsible for these things that are happening there, doesn't that encourage them to be more proactive to prevent bad things from happening at school too?
Yeah, and a big part of Title IX is that they have rules that apply to how they have to investigate sexual assault, have to respond to it. And so it's certainly still helping people have protection in schools. It's just that these claims arise against the school system when you can show that they failed to protect them in such a way. And that's where the liability comes from under Title IX.
And I'll make one more point here. The damages and the emotional damages that have attached through the cases in the past decades really brought teeth to the law. I'm not aware of one situation where a school has had their federal funding minimized or taken away because of their discrimination. So this form of relief was really what gave Title IX its teeth and helped prevent sexual assault from happening in the schools because it was a strong deterrent for the institutions.
Got it. Thank you.
In the Name of Personal Injury Law is brought to you by the Sinas Law Firm.